The legislation that has been introduced in the House and the Senate on a bipartisan basis calls it if after 6 months there is not an agreement, then additional sanctions would be imposed in order, in our view, to put more pressure on the Iranians to come to an agreement. Now, as you know, the administration says, no, don't do that. Well, I'd like to point out that it's the present sanctions that many people believe caused the Iranians to come to the table, and the administration had opposed those sanctions at that time.
President Rouhani of Iran was suggesting this is the beginning, not a temporary agreement with the United States. They don't see turning back from this point. So what evidence do you need to see in July that you're willing to ease sanctions and put that legislation on the shelf?
Well, what I think we deserve to see is a final agreement that everybody signs. The issues are not that complex to start with. They are a country that has a 30-year record of cheating. Mr. Rouhani himself bragged about how he had deceived the negotiators back when he was the chief negotiator. And so we want to make sure that this is verifiable. And one of the key elements is the so-called right to enrich. Because if they continue to enrich, then that puts them on the path to the development of a nuclear weapon. We say, if you want nuclear material for peaceful purposes, we'll get it to you. And that is already turning into one of the huge sticking points.
Do you have confidence in this president right now that he can stick to his words? There was even questions about the Geneva II talks and what was said behind the scenes and what was said publicly.
I don't think there's any doubt that there's a dramatic shift between Ahmadinejad and Rouhani. I mean, the man, Rouhani, has a very pleasant demeanor. He reaches out. He's putting on a very strong PR campaign, as opposed to Ahmadinejad, who used to go up and bang on the table at the UN. So there's a dramatic shift in the behavior of Rouhani. Now the question is will there be a verifiable freeze on Iran's path towards acquisition of nuclear weapons? And that requires inspections, it requires some element of trust, but certainly in the view of many of us, it calls for abandoning the so-called right to enrich. Because if you enrich, there's no other purpose for it than to build a nuclear weapon.
Do you think it's wise to leave Syria out of the equation when it comes to negotiations with Iran? Because Iran exerts a lot of influence over Syria. Could you not link it to the sanctions legislation as well to say, cooperate on Syria, let's see your enrichment program, but it's bundled together and not separately?
I think that would be too big a menu. But to negotiate with the Iranians strictly on that issue and at the same time have them be behind the 5,000 Hezbollah and all the weapons and all the training and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard is an utter disregard of Iran's behavior, which is terrorist plots, latest we found more weapons from Iran pouring into Yemen. They're responsible for plotting and executing acts of terror throughout the world.